Good morning, participants. We're still waiting for some people to join, and we were going to give them until 5 past, so we've got another 2 minutes. Sitting beside me is Megan Purcell. We're sitting in the AICD headquarters, business headquarters in Canberra, the night after budget night, the day after budget night. So some of us have been at budget night dinners and breakfasts, so if we look a bit needing the concealer, you'll know why. Very, very interesting. Before I hand over to Megan, very interesting to reflect in terms of a budget where we were very fortunate to be able to take part in the lockup. So our policy officer, Anthony Taylor, was able to see the budget details 4 hours before they were published, before the Treasurer presented the 2019 budget. And as you scroll through the many different booklets and areas of the budget, one of the things to reflect on is that there are, of course, budget allocations to different areas of the economy and different participants in the economy. And as a segue into the discussion, the very fortunate discussion we've got the pleasure of hosting with Megan this morning, it's very interesting to think about how those budget allocations and those funded organisations, sometimes it's sectors and sometimes it's specific business entities, achieved some of those those gains for their sector. This is one of the things that we'll be talking about now, because to get a budget allocation to a specific area of the economy or to an industry is a process that starts long before the budget papers, isn't it? It really, Megan, it really starts with effective lobbying and advocacy.
Definitely.
I'm going to ask Megan to talk, first of all, a little bit about her background. Sorry to interrupt you, but just before I kick off, I just wanted to explain the format for the webinar this morning. We're fortunate to have some people in the room with us who are face-to-face participants. So from time to time, you can't see them on the screen, but they're watching the webinar live. We'll ask these attendees to contribute their ideas and input. We'd also like everybody who's on this call, on this webinar, to also contribute. Megan would like you to feel very free, and in fact encourages you to use the Q&A dialogue box to write down questions and thoughts as the webinar goes on, so that we can pick up and actually respond throughout the webinar. If we have time at the end, we'll also have some Q&A. So that's going on in the background. Please treat this as an interactive webinar. So now I'd like to hand over to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Melina, for having me.
To you.
Got me front and centre there. And again, thank you everyone for coming along, for tuning in. This is a first for me, doing a webinar and in-person workshop. So I'm hoping that it's not too clunky, but absolutely would love for everyone to please give us some feedback, examples, Q&A throughout the session today. I think it's really important to share, so I look forward to hearing from you. I think you have to type in the little Q&A box that should be popped up on your screen right now, and that will be what I see that comes up on the screen with any questions. Correct? Yep, beautiful. Okay, so here's an outline of what we are discussing today. Bit of introduction, which we've just had briefly from Melina, and I will speak a little bit about who I am and why I'm here, what I do. The 6 top tips that I've given you that you can really implement any moment from right now. The 3 elements to then mastering that influence, and a Q&A at the end. So, okay. You are probably wondering who I am and why I'm here holding this workshop and working with fabulous guys from the BCCM. For over 15 years, I've worked with government, for government, at the highest levels. I've briefed ministers, prime ministers, opposition leaders, done state government, federal, in departments, the whole kit and caboodle, really. And as part of that, I found one of my key roles and one of the most important parts of what I would do would be to try and help ministers and departmental officials to understand the needs and the concerns of business groups, not-for-profits, even local governments, service delivery organisations in their area. I found this quite challenging, so we'll come to that. I do some media recently, Q&A, and featured across a whole host of networks and radio at different times. And basically, I try and help you work through the systems and processes that are used by decision makers in government to understand them better and to really know how this glue that sticks business, community, and government together works. So as part of that, I'm not a lobbyist. I don't do government relations for you. I'm not here to say I'm going to open doors and introduce you to ministers. I firmly believe that's an outdated, outmoded model of paying a lobbyist a lot of money and thinking that that's going to work out in today's day and age. It just doesn't cut it, and it's too risky for a lot of ministers and their teams as well to work too closely with lobbyists. So this is really more about what I offer being how to do it yourself, how to make sure that your message is heard and that you get out there and in front of the right decision makers at the right time. I really guide you through a process that works. As part of that, I really break it down into 3 pillars. The first one is building your proposal, where we work together and work on developing an ask that's right for government, that's got the right pitch, that's research prepared and kind of systematically working through the who, what, when, where, how stuff. I teach people how to articulate their pitch and really get the ask down pat. Before moving into the second pillar, which is accelerating the ask. And that's kind of the nitty-gritty about finding the right people at the right time and getting the right access and how you can do that yourself. Learning, how to get a meeting, how to secure events, how to really work through policy and strategy to figure out who the best person is and why you'd want to speak to them. It's also then something that we use to move into the third pillar of securing the result. And that's really about working towards getting that thing locked down, whether it is legislative change, whether it is a contract, whether it is a grant, it could be a policy change of some sort. We build a whole strategy and then work on fostering these relationships, because as Melina said, nothing that you see in the budget or any of these legislative changes in a particular sector kind of come out of the blue. Other than the odd captain's pick we hear about for politicians sometimes, this stuff is all well and truly worked through months, if not years beforehand, and it is a slow process. And so this relationship building and ongoing connection is just super important. And as part of securing the result, we look at both getting what you want initially and then how to work that through to make sure that you maintain those relationships nonstop. And I've realised I'm wearing the same jacket that's in that lovely photo of me as well. So I'm matching. I did that on purpose today. Okay, so basically what we're doing today is I'm going to pull some threads, mostly out of step 1, because I really think that's kind of the most important part. And the first sort of slide, or the first chunk we go through, is really the nuts and bolts of what people get wrong so often, but which is just... I don't want to say not that hard to get right, but with the right focus and attention, something that can definitely be achieved by literally anyone. All right. So also what I want to say is, if we can have your questions and feedback at any time. Oh, Thank you. That's a quote about me and some of the work that I do. Again, just showing, I haven't just walked in off the street. So just tooting my own horn for a little moment there. And mostly, though, I work with private sector businesses. I've done a little bit of work with the BCCM, for example, as well. And a lot of people who really, they've understood that because of something, whether there's an announcement by government that's taken them by surprise that they weren't expecting in their sector, or, there's a tender opportunity coming up, or perhaps a budget announcement that they think, oh, we could take advantage of that. I mostly work with private sector businesses that have realised they need to work with and engage government. They're not big enough in terms of being like a Telstra or a Holden or Coca-Cola to have a full, suite of government relations team of their own, but they realise that this is a space that they really need to start thinking about and moving into. So I don't do it on a partisan basis. My goal is to help you learn what to do no matter what the party, to get politicians to like you and what you stand for regardless. But really, a lot of my clients are people who just have hit a brick wall, or they get completely kind of confused and frustrated in trying to work through the system because they don't know what to do on their own when it comes to dealing with government. They just can't get where they want. It's all too confusing and it's all too hard. And of course, that means that their communities, their organisations miss out on whatever the resources, infrastructure, policy could be. So before I move on, we move into the next slide. Let's assume people have read that. Thank you. Okay. My first question is, well, what's holding you back? I would love to get some input, because from my point of view, there's some definite areas, having been on the inside and the outside, doing the ask and receiving the ask, where people get things really wrong, so wrong. The number of times people will come to see a minister and they won't know why they're there. They might be, oh, we're just in Canberra and we thought we'd pop in, doesn't really cut it for people who are a little bit busy running the country. Or, they might have a shopping list of staff, but there's no clear priorities, or they haven't got it costed, or they don't have partners locked in place for what they want to achieve. Or even sometimes you can tell the ones, and they're usually industry associations, who are really just there so they can report back to their board and say, oh yes, we met with 15 ministers, and they're not actually really wanting to achieve anything. You don't know what it is. So I'm interested to get some feedback. If anyone online can type in the Q&A box and let me know, is there any time where you've wanted to engage, or you've tried to engage, and there has somehow been something that has gone awry in that process? And to the guys in the room as well, if you want to tell me, I might kind of quickly reiterate that. If there's any times you've thought, okay, that really didn't work, or that you want to do something and you haven't tried it. I'll put you on the spot because I can see you also. I'm looking at you.
One of the observations I made is sometimes you just have to accept the times to try it.
Yeah.
So the number of budget proposals, that's zero, where you put it up a couple of years in a row, everyone goes yes, but it gets to the final shape of the budget, and the emphasis on the budget doesn't align with your particular issue because we're talking about the economy, or what have you. A good idea will always have its time, but the point you made about it's long term, we need to have patience, and we need to be able to sort of read a broader environmental context about what's likely to be something that will be more chance of proceeding in a particular year than another.
Absolutely. So Linda basically was saying about putting up a budget proposal and then having it not get through. And I think I'm going to go out on a limb here and just say something very quickly. So if I was in that situation, to be honest, budget proposals aren't worth the paper they're printed on, in my view. That's my view. Governments make this thing where they might say, 8 months out from the budget, okay, we're accepting proposals, everybody put them in. they don't really do anything with them, you know. What they really do is, you're right in the comment of it's a long-term game, they remember the person whose face was in front of them. They remember the argument made, they remember the issue. When you've got a stack of 1,000 pieces of paper on your desk and they're all different organisations saying, please pick me, I'm great, I want budget money, how do you make yours stand out and make it different? Well, you know, if it's just another piece of paper in a pile, it really doesn't. So I hope I haven't offended you there. But that's something that I would suggest, is that I think a lot of organisations go down that path and put in time and effort to whip up a proposal, but it's not actually something in the end that's worth that effort, and there are better ways to achieve the end goal. There's a question from Andrew saying, how do you get to know who are the influential people that wield power behind the scenes if you are not in the thick of the political action? Excellent question. And I think the great thing you've picked up on there is that it is about the influential people that wield power behind the scenes. One of the things that you see sometimes is people go in and they think, okay, I want to get this done, I have to meet with the minister. That's actually not necessarily true. There's a whole lot of different ways to get stuff done and different people to speak to. I'm going to go over that in a little bit more detail as we move through. I think it's about the third or fourth point. So let me come back to that a little bit more, Andrew, but please, if you don't think I've answered it right or you want more, let me know. Thank you. Okay, so I have chosen to make this really quite broad. I'm not being specific around what it is that you might want to achieve here in terms of whether it is a budget announcement, whether it is policy change, tender, grant, service delivery, whatever it may be, local project. This is just really broad information that I believe can be applied to any of those and can be kind of tailored in the right way to make things work. So the first one, be clear about what you want, goes back to what I was saying earlier, and is absolutely, without doubt, in my view, the biggest mistake that people make. So many people start on a strategy for how to achieve something without being really clear on what it is they want from the political element. So I guess a clear-cut and really easy, good example would be a local government who will go, okay, yeah, we're in Canberra, it's local government conference time, all, however many local governments there are, 500 say, they're all there, and we'll make meetings with ministers and we'll come in and we'll give them our presentation. And then they come and they'll meet with you and you get the presentation and it'll be, okay, so we want to build a road and we want to build an arts centre and we want to build a kindergarten. And you say, oh, okay, right, that's a lot of things. And then the problem with that is not only is it a scattergun approach of a list of stuff, but they haven't drilled down into, okay, well, how are they going to achieve it? You know, how much of that have they got that they're putting in the funding for the road, and the state government is going to be asked for some, and then the federal government as well. But usually with local government projects, all three governments levels are expected to commit. It could be they haven't, you know, they want to build an arts centre, but the community doesn't want it in that particular spot and they're up in arms about it. So what proof do they have that the local community is engaged with the process and that they actually want this thing? That it's something that is relevant and needed. You know, what partners have they already got on board? So they want to build an arts centre. Well, have they got the local business association on board? Have they got the local artists groups? Have they got, you know, some funding in place from a local philanthropic donor? Knowing the specific ask for federal government, you know, we want $10 million to add to our pot of $30 million to build this arts centre, and it's important to our community because there are no other arts centres within 100 kilometres and our community's missing out. And you can see from our last 5 community surveys that they've identified this problem, and so we're really seeking to fix it. It's clearly just a much stronger argument than coming in with an arts centre as one of a shopping list of items. So the first thing I want to say is, you know, to differentiate yourself, don't kind of just do the rounds when you're in Canberra the way that these types of people often do, because you become one face in 35 meetings that they've had with other similar organisations that week. But secondly, you know, go in with partners in place, a figure in mind, the exact wording of the legislative change that you're after, or close to, you know, have the legislation there and have it clear what it is that you want changed. Just a really clear articulation of the problem that you want solved, the issue that you are facing, what kind of project this is. You know, the governments, particularly in election years, like to throw on money for capital investment. So they would love to have the ability to help you put a new manufacturing production line in your plant, because it gives them a great opportunity to have their photo taken and wear the hairnet and fluoro, and, you know, it looks great and all their stuff. Whereas, you know, recurring costs for staffing or whatever it may be is just not very sexy, and usually isn't eligible for a lot of government funding anyway. So effectively, once you're really clear on what it is that you want to achieve, you can then also identify, that leaves you on to making sure that you're asking the right person, because you can then see clearly what portfolio it might fall under, what pool of money, etc., etc. And you can also then kind of decide and pitch, is this more of an election commitment kind of thing? Is this something that is, you know, a vote winner? Is it good for a local community? Or is this something that you're going to plug away at year after year because you really want it to be, you know, a budget announcement and you're just waiting for the right time, as we discussed earlier? So all of these are about really just getting super specific. One of the most brilliant and excellent ways that this can be achieved is to really break it down into like a one-page briefing note that you can give the person that you're wanting to engage with and connect with, either before the meeting, at the meeting, during the meeting, what have you, but it really nails it down. And as part of this, at the end today, I've spoken to Melina, and I'm going to give her a sample copy of one, just a brief one-pager that fits along with what government have in their briefing papers at the moment. So it's got similar headings and topics, and I can issue this to you guys as a bit of a freebie, as a template that you can use for your engagement, that then you will know that the person you're giving it to will understand that, because it's what they already receive from government internally. And it just fits with that same, you know, same list and same structure. Okay, the next, that is a big chunk. I know I've just, you know, talked at you around getting down into the nitty-gritty. Everything else we're covering today is kind of how you can, you know, complement that and work through. So the next one is knowing exactly why you want it. You know, going back to the Arts Centre, that's about the evidence for what it is that you know, that you're after, that says that there's demand for this thing. You know, why do you need a new factory? Why does this policy need to be changed? What is wrong with it at the moment? You know, and what are the outcomes going to be? So have you thought through, if this policy change, it might be good for your members, but what will it mean for everyone else out there? You know, is it a positive outcome for them as well, or are you only thinking of your own members? And if it is a positive outcome for everyone, how can you demonstrate that, and what's the proof or examples that you can give that explain why, you know, this is good for the most amount of people, and, you know, what people it will be great for. What further one is, why is this level of government essential to the project? So the conversation today is also very applicable to state government, probably less so local, but you know, a lot of policy areas do cross over, and it can be really confusing around state and federal in particular these days. Knowing which level of government to pitch to and what you want from them and why they're the ones to talk to at that time can be really important, particularly in anything that is a community project that might be, say, you know, health and education, that's got both state and federal policy imprint. Knowing the level of government is really important, particularly if it's a crossover area where more than one level of government could work together on a project. So often with election commitments in particular, you might find there can be a chicken and egg thing where the state government might say, well, we're not committing until the feds put in, and the feds will say, well, we won't commit till the state government puts in. And there's a lot of work involved in that. So you need to be really clear why this level of government has been targeted for this particular ask. And then the next why I would ask is, why are you the person that's in this space? Like, why are you the one that is spearheading this project or making this ask? Are you the best person to do this? Sometimes it might be the CEO of an organisation, but sometimes it could be someone else who's just really passionate about this issue and knows absolutely everything about it, who might be the person who knows the pitch, knows the project inside and out, who actually is the best person to go ahead and do it. Although I counsel you against, in working with government, ever having too many people from your organisation involved, because it gets messy and confusing. But the why a particular person is really important as well. And finally, the why at this time. So why right now? Is it urgent? And if it is urgent, explain why it's urgent. Explain why it's a budget ask as opposed to something for an election commitment, as opposed to something for a tender round, or looking at the why of the timing is an important consideration when you're working through this process as well. So the next one is how you're going to achieve your ask. So will your organisation, be able to survive without this policy change? Will you still build that factory, that abattoir, that whatever, even if you don't get government funding? Will you push on or not? Will you build a smaller building? Will you find a way to shift your organisation operations overseas because the Australian legislation is now too strict? Knowing how you're going to achieve that end goal, the what, is part of this. That there's not just the one kind of, okay, we have to speak to the federal minister for blah and we have to get them to do this and they must have this outcome. They're likely to ask you, or likely as part of your engagement, to have some kind of response like, well, what happens if this doesn't occur? Because they can't always say yes to your requests. And honestly, having a really well thought out answer that says, okay, if you don't do this for us, this is what will happen. Our 100,000 members are going to rise up and they're going to protest and they're going to tell people, don't vote One Nation at the election. If you don't do this, this is going to be the outcome. Or if you do it and, you can only do half of it, well, we can negotiate and things will be okay. Or, these are going to be the outcomes. So that really determines for them, in their mind, okay, is my involvement in this essential? And if it is, how can I scale that and what influence can I bring to bear? This also connects to providing the political value in the process. So this is where you do think about things like saying, okay, if you don't change legislation, our members will complain. And it's not going to be, oh, we're just going to ask them all to write you an email because nobody reads those emails anyway. It's going to be, we're going to have a public protest in this marginal seat that may very well cost you votes. That's the kind of stuff that gets them to sit up and pay attention. And conversely, you might say, okay, well, if you agree to commit to, half of the funding for our new road, well, we're going to put big signs up all along there so the local community know that Megan's political party funded this road. We're going to make sure that you come along to turning the first sod and have a photo op and the local media is there. We're going to make sure that you come along to the laying of the first piece of bitumen and have a photo op and the media is there. We're going to make sure that you come along to the first car driving on that bitumen and there's a photo op and the media is there. So being able to articulate, the benefits of what you're asking for is also, super important in working out, how you can work to achieve this.
Megan, could I interrupt
and
ask a question?
Elena, go for it.
Voice from the side. Is it always about what is the electoral payoff? Because it's often been suggested to us at the BCCM that when we've had the strongest, most positive response from government, it's been out of really fully articulating what it is that positively impacts the policy environment of the party that we're talking to. So it's about what's in it for government, but it's not necessarily, it's quite hard to actually prove that you can deliver votes.
Yeah.
But if you can deliver a solution to a policy issue that's broader than your own self-interest, then that can influence governments positively as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, so you are right. That goes down to, I guess, the core philosophical differences between the party and getting the alignment with the beliefs of different parties. Now, if you're clever, you can find a way to make your ask align, more than one, depending on how you pitch it. For example, in employment services, you might go to the Liberal Party and say, okay, this is all about us helping people take individual responsibility for themselves. We're going to get them off welfare. They're taking individual responsibility, and that's what fits with the Liberal Party's platform. So this would be really great if you support it. You might go to the Nationals and say, this is about regional communities looking after one another, and that's really important. So that's why, you should support this initiative to get people into work. You might go to the Greens and say, well, it's important from a social justice point of view to make sure that as many people as possible can contribute effectively to society, and that's why you should support this. So you can, take the one ask and tailor it around a party's platform, and Melina raises a really good point. I think that is important in the sense that when you are pitching to different parties, which is usually something that is policy change more than anything, or a legislative type issue, that's something to think about also in terms of who cares the most. So if you're a backbencher on a margin of 0.1%, you're probably not super fussed about what aligns with your party values so much as what aligns with getting votes. Whereas if you are the absolute party stalwart person who is known for being the super conservative or the raging greenie or the whatever it is, you're probably more invested in that ideological side of the party and more likely for it to sway you. So that is, it's certainly a factor. And I think that lines more strategically, to be honest, around the targeting too of when you get to like dealing with the crossbench, the backbench, the non-government parties. Yeah. I think we'll maybe pick that up in a little bit when we move on to who. So hopefully this one will be helpful to you, Andrew. Figuring out who really makes the decisions, because you are spot on. This can be a bit personality driven. I know, plenty of you have had stuff to do with these offices enough. Obviously, you know that behind the scenes is potentially super influential. Depending on the nature of your ask, the person most influential over it could be the staff member to the backbencher, to the minister, to the secretary of the department. It could be that the secretary of the department is the influential person who can get the minister to do the job. It could be that the local party members of the backbench are. It could be that the backbench is the influential person to get the minister to do something. So the who step, it has kind of many heads because it's about figuring out taking the maximum number of angles to work out who the real decision-making influencers are. Now, part of this can be tricky because there are ministers for whom they trust their staff, for example, absolutely implicitly. And you can go to them and say, boss, this is what I think. And they'll just go, sure, that's what I think. Go for it. And so, in that case, obviously engaging with the staff member is actually more beneficial. They've got more time, more opportunity for interest in your issue than engaging with the minister themselves, who likely has, 28 meetings back to back booked in a single day and won't remember whatever it was that you talked about anyway. There are some of them who are really hands-on and want to know everything. We all heard about Prime Minister Rudd needing to know the ins and outs of every issue and making every decision by himself. And some of them have less engagement in their policy space, and some of them have more, right? So if you're talking about getting in the ear of a minister who, a good example is an ex-boss of mine who was the Minister for Defence, but also leader of the government in the Senate. So yes, defence is really important. It's a massive portfolio, but you would find when leader of the government in the Senate work came up, because, for example, there was an unwieldy crossbench and you needed to negotiate what was going to be on the program that week, or what the legislation was that the PM wanted to get through, or what have you, then perhaps the portfolio stuff goes by the wayside for a short amount of time. So being cognizant of the priorities, particularly at a certain time period, and knowing the influence that can come to bear, right? So if you can get the crossbenchers on side for your issue, then you don't know when they're going to go back to that leader of the government in the Senate as, Nick Xenophon's team and say, oh, actually, we'll support you on this thing, but we need you to take a look at this and make that happen as well. And if that's your issue, well, you're bloody lucky. So I think a lot of people automatically assume the party in government is their who, and they have to target the minister because they are the ultimately responsible person for any legislation or pot of money or what have you. And that's absolutely not the case at all. You can find, going back to Melina's point, it could be the influential backbencher who's really passionate about whatever ideological issue, who will support you to push it through. It could be the crossbench. It could be a staff member. It could be any one of these people. I think this is something that is probably the trickiest to do on your own. Going back to your point, Andrew, really identifying. But certainly when you start to build these relationships, you will quickly work out whether it's this person or that person who you need to talk to. And I would say in the beginning stages, even to start with a list and then kind of narrow it down and go, okay, is this person really relevant? Is this person? Is it a... is it even the minister's decision? Because sometimes people come in and lobby for things and they really want stuff to happen. And it turns out that it's a delegated decision and the department has complete responsibility for it anyway, so that the minister's at arm's length and there can't be any political interference, in which case, talking to the minister's not really achieving you anything. So drilling down into who is really important, I would also say anything that's a local project, you're talking both government and opposition there, maybe even crossbench, but certainly talk to your local MP if this is something that they can engage in. Like usually that's something a bit sexy. If it's a local project, it's usually you're building something. or, you know, committing to something, you know, could be the change rooms at your sports club or what have you. And you'll find that speaking to both your local MP, who can be your advocate, and also whoever is your patron senator. So every party that holds a seat, the other party has a nominated person that is responsible for their party's activities in that seat. And so they're called patron senators. And so they often have a vested interest as well, because they help put together things like wish lists that identify the priorities for that area and what funding they might allocate, particularly come election time. So I'd always say engage with the patron senator as well. If you don't know who that is, it's usually pretty easy to find out by even a quick Google search of the news, because you'll see that's the senator who's always popping up in your, you know, your local area. If you just sort of look, for example, I know I'm from Bendigo. If I went, you know, Bendigo senator, I would see that Jane Hume is the name that keeps popping up time and time again. Local MP, Lisa Chesters, and I would go and speak to both of them and say, hey, I really think this is a great thing for you to commit to because of this. So look at when and where. Minutes. We've got 15 minutes. Good, because we're moving into the last couple of issues. This is considering the details of making a specific ask, going back to our very first issue, looking at when and where we approach, you know, the decision maker that we've just identified, who the relevant person is, right? So I discussed, for example, not coming and making an approach to someone at the same time that everyone else is, because you're just forgotten in the sea of meetings. So this could be, is it better for you to maybe not go to Canberra and maybe you chat to them when Parliament's not sitting and maybe you visit them in their electorate office? That's probably particularly powerful if you have a presence or you're representative of the same state as them, even more so if you're in their local area. Visiting them on their home turf generally shows you're dedicated, and it shows them that you're not just doing the rounds, that they're not just one in, you know, however many meetings that that you might have, but that they're important and special, and you've made the time and effort to go and see them about this issue. The when is around, you know, the election cycle. So we're looking at an election being called in the next week now. If you want something committed, you probably left it too late, I'm going to say. You might be very lucky, you never know, but you probably left it too late to engage at this point in time for the election. So that really needed to start at least 8, probably 12 months ago, talking to your local MPs, talking to the patron senators, the local candidates who are pretty much all on the ground now, about what might work for you if we're talking about something that could be an election commitment. And I'll pick up on that. Election commitments, although they are by and large local community projects, and they are things like, you know, roads and libraries and art centres and that sort of stuff, do not discount ways in which you can use them to influence either policy change or broader commitments, you know, whether that is something like, you know, we're going to roll out X millions of dollars to try out some new innovative models. What you might want to do is find a way to make sure that some of that money goes to you, or that is conducted in your area. And sometimes the best kind of commitments or problems or things to be solved, you know, they love the ones that are free, obviously. So policy change costs nothing. So if, you know, the government can make a commitment that does fit with their ideological standpoint that they think is going to win them votes, you know, election cycle is a great time to be working towards for that. And in your what and your how, you'd be looking at the evidence that demonstrates that to that particular party. Another when issue is around probity. This is big in government these days. they're just so scared of not passing the pub test, right? Of people accusing them of, you opened doors for this person, they're your mate, didn't do the right thing. We probably all saw the stuff around Joe Hockey and Matthias Cormann recently, getting in strife for sending a couple of emails. As much as you might think that government operates on this kind of insider level, these days, most people are so paranoid about that happening that, if anything, they'll do nothing for their mates because they're scared. They don't want to lose their jobs. And so this probity stuff is really important, because whenever there's a big funding decision coming up, they will stop you from talking to them about it. So that could be regional development grants, it could be defence, it could be employment services, any number of things. It's the same across government. They'll say, okay, we're moving into a tender process or a grants process here, and actually we can't talk to you about it anymore. So if you've made your decision that you want to apply for X grant and that's the time that you go and talk to government, you've left it too late, because they can't actually engage with you at that point in time as meaningfully as you might like. Going back to the where, can you bring them to you is another thing to consider. I talked about going to them in their home turf. Can you bring them to you? Have you got a premises that makes a great photo op? Have you got somewhere you can take them that allows them to talk one-on-one with your workers about why this issue is really important and get a heartfelt conversation going that will really resonate with them and emphasize why it's important? Can you invite them along and make them feel really special and loved and important, but also give them the chance to make something relevant to their voters and their party as to why they should make this thing happen? And finally, of course, the all-important photo op. So that fits with my last little slide as well. I've got final tips kind of on the day. This is predicated on starting things off with, with a meeting, with a visit, with a what have you. Politicians love a photo op. Even better these days if they can get a little video. The Parliament House backdrop, it's pretty boring. Everyone does it. It's in my mind, it's something that I think people think they'll be taken seriously if they go and meet them in Parliament House. My suggestion is, if you can avoid it at all and you can find another way to get in and connect, I would go with a different way, because everyone kind of rolls through the doors at those times, particularly for ministers. Backbenchers, on the other hand, when they come to Canberra, for them, this is their downtime, right? So when they're in their electorates is when they're really busy. It's when they're going to 1,000 community events. There's heaps of stuff on there, trying to touch voters. For them, when they come to Canberra is when, they don't have ministerial responsibilities. They kind of sit in their office and have a few chats and occasionally might twiddle their thumbs. So that's a good chance to engage with them. Whether that's one-on-one, whether that's through backbench policy committees, but a good backbencher who is a really strong advocate for your cause can be the most powerful influencer that you can have. There's some caveats to my get in their space as much as you can. Sometimes Parliament can be effective as well. I would say limit the number of people. A lot of organisations, particularly if they're trying to prove that they've got cross-organisational support, will send a delegation of 10 people to sit in a room. It's too many. No one can remember the names. No one can remember who they stand for and what they do. It's too many. So, 2 people should be more than enough. If you can't get your point across and you can't make a strong argument with 2 people, that goes back to the who. You're not sending the right person, and if you can't do it, shouldn't be you going. You really only need key people who can really speak and articulate well, and it does not have to be the CEO at all. You don't have to think, because I'm meeting someone important, I have to send someone important. That's not necessarily the case. Take the one-pager. You can make it fancy and glossy. I'm going to send a copy to you. So I think that's just a really nice overview, and it makes it easy for ministers and staff and backbenchers and everyone to understand what you're about. Look for the colourful photo op. So if you've got a chance of just standing there all in a row smiling, or you've got an opportunity to show a minister or someone, you know, in the fluoro wearing a helmet, digging a hole, go the more interesting option. Like, set something up for them, make it easy for them to do. So, hey, you know, we'd love to have you here. We're going to give you this great photo op. This is what's going to happen. Make sure that you've also identified and acknowledged important people. So if we're talking something like a ribbon cutting or a launch or what have you, include the MPs, but also include the staff, because as we discussed, they can be super influential. Don't sort of go, I want a closed door chat with you now, MP, minister, and sort of try and leave staff out, because actually they're pretty important most of the time. I would say, actually, if you can get on the good side of the staff, then that's very, very good. They're often involved in negotiating back and forth between departments, between offices. They'll do all the nitty gritty of trying to get your issue across the line. It'll just be their boss that smiles at the end and cuts that ribbon and takes the credit for it. So that brings me to the end of our final tips there for what you might do on the day if you're pitching to government. I have a little slide up here that's a bit more detailed about what I talked about earlier around the stuff that I do and how we build the proposal, accelerate the ask, and secure the result. We go through a bunch more stuff, like how to enlist support, leveraging your connections, how to play both sides, how to connect and actually get the ball rolling in the first place, how to get that first connection, how to run the actual conversation and the meeting, how to make the ask and not make it sound silly. How to build an ongoing relationship, keep the connection up, and how to make sure you really acknowledge the help, that you make them feel loved, they make you feel loved, but how to win friends and influence in government by making sure that they feel like they're always getting value out of every conversation with you. And we go into also things like the delicacies of, donations and lobbying, and just making sure that you always pass the pub test and that everything is above board and that you can get what you want without, crossing any lines, whether that's deliberate or inadvertent. And it's usually anything's inadvertent, but making sure that that's just really, really clear. So, before we wrap up, is there anyone who has any more questions, examples, and anything they'd like to ask in the last few minutes? In the room? Melina?
I want to ask a question, a really candid question to you as an insider.
Yeah.
Who really do politicians like to meet with? Do they prefer to meet? Genuinely, is it, I suppose it varies, but do they like face-to-face with the businesses or enterprises? Mm-hmm. Is trade and industry bodies? Yeah. Leading individuals, champions, as you were talking about, and I was thinking, for example, the directors on cooperatives and mutuals are really important because they genuinely represent. They have the members' hat on as well, so they're the voice of the members.
Yeah. So
but who do they prefer to meet with?
That's a really great question. I would say, look, honestly, the number one thing that makes a difference is a passionate and knowledgeable person who, if they can walk out of the meeting and go, wow, like that person, they knew what they were here for, they knew that they care about it, it's really important to them, and they showed it to me. It honestly doesn't matter who you are. I think the industry bodies are really great in terms of usually we're dealing with things that are like a policy or legislative type issue, like the overarching big picture stuff is where BCCM and all the industry bodies can come in and build a strong case. However, individual businesses can also have a really strong impact, particularly if they do have that passion. And I don't think that matters. I found it really interesting. So most recently, and the area I do a lot of work in is sort of employment education type stuff. The employment sector I found fascinating. We have a current employment services contract for $9 billion. It's the biggest government contract outside of defence. and yet most people in that sector you never hear from and don't really engage on a government level. But the ones that do will come and tell you, okay, we're having trouble servicing this caseload. It could be, we're struggling really hard with young mums on income support. What can you do and how can this work? Or this particular policy decision is hitting them really hard. And that stuff changes. Like, absolutely, they're influential. Having been on the inside, you absolutely take that away and go, okay, how can we fix it? How can we solve this problem for them? Whereas the ones you don't hear from and you don't know what their problems are, well, you can't solve them, can you? You're thinking, well, there's probably heaps of issues out there. Well, in fact, there is, because you see it on the news, in employment services in particular, people saying this is terrible. You get letters from people complaining. So there's problems, but unless you get the detail of them and you are given, options for solving it, then how do you know? So I would say, yes, industry bodies are great, but CEOs shouldn't be afraid if they think it's worth their while and they have an issue to also front up themselves. That don't think that that somehow undermines your industry body. It usually complements it. Yeah. That's my feedback.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I'm very cognizant that we have run out of time.
Yep.
Please fill out the survey so we can continuously improve our events. This will be emailed to you along with the fact sheet that Megan's spoken about. I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank you for your time.
No problem. Now, on the very final slide, you've got my contact details there. I am very happy, as we've done our little experimental in-person and webinar conversation today, to have a chat with anyone. If you've got any kind of strategy issues that you would like to have a quick walk through and just get my feedback on what you think I would do in that situation or how I'd advise. I'm really happy to have a chat with anyone. Please feel free. I think you can even click on that screen and you'll get sent to my website, but grab my number, shoot me an email. I'd love to have a quick strategy conversation. And of course, in the next few days, I'll work with Melina and her team and we'll get out that little template as a bit of a thank you for coming along as well. So appreciate the time and enjoy your day. Thanks.